Yeah, I don't understand why I'm not. Oh, there you are. Okay. So you're not showing up on my screen, but you're showing up on the DRS live screen or the actual YouTube screen. Weird.
Okay.
All right. So that'll work. Okay. Seems to be just some kind of lag. I wonder if it's them or wonder if it's me. I don't know. I do not know. Let's see. Is nobody in the actual chat yet?
I'm still not able to find anything online to tell me what the heck I'm supposed to do to be able to actually post anything in there.
That sounds like a personal problem.
The only participant is you. We're not participants.
Let's see. What, in the live chat?
Yep.
Oh, I know why. Okay.
There's Chris Lester. He got in. How the heck did you get in?
So I opened the YouTube link that Paul gave me and muted the audio on there.
Yeah, that's what I've done.
And then typed in the chat box on the right side.
Yeah, it won't let me type in. It just says create a channel to join the chat when I go over where I'm supposed to type.
Are you possibly, do you not have you don't have a YouTube account with an existing channel or something?
I don't even know what a channel is. So
channel is where your videos get posted so that people can see, videos that you've created.
Yeah, then I don't have that. I've never posted a video.
Yeah.
Okay. That's why you don't have a channel then.
Well, fine. Fine.
Excuse me. If you're just now joining us, I very much apologize for kicking you out of the old Hangout. This is the first time we've done this, and I goofed. So, but we're almost ready to go here. It's almost time. So, thank you for your patience, and my apologies for completely screwing the pooch. Yeah, welcome to DRS Live. Here for round 2. There's one thing I need to do first. Harry, we're so disorganized.
If we weren't disorganized, nothing would happen.
I need a handler.
You need more than a handler.
Phrasing.
Right. So are any of you people actually coming to Balticon?
I am.
I know you are. I know he's not. But what about? I'm wondering about the patrons who are on the air.
J.R. Handley says, Terry is going for the Santa beard. Can I sit on his lap and tell him what I want for Christmas?
Yeah, you go ahead and try that. Ah, Terry's in. Okay. All right.
Yeah, creating a channel apparently worked for me.
All right.
Hooray!
Hey! All right. It is officially 2 p.m. Are we ready to get this thing rocking?
Let's do it.
All right. Howdy, patrons! You're here for DRS Live. It's amazing. So thank you very much for joining us. And today we are going to talk with Mr. Christopher Lester. That goes by Chris.
Hello.
I'm afraid that your French accent is just terrible.
My French accent is just amazing, man. It makes Pepe Le Pew look like he's from Rhodesia. Try and parse that statement. Go ahead. Try it. Go ahead. I dare you. Yeah, you got nothing.
I don't want to touch that.
You don't want to touch that. See, Chris, you made a really big mistake when you decided to, agree to join us for this, mess.
Oh, that remains to be seen whether this is a mistake or not.
Okay, well, let's get into let's start talking. We'll find out for sure. Chris Lester is a podcaster and author, most well known for the Metamore City podcast and the series of stories. Oh, Lord, how many books do you have out now, Chris?
So 4 books are in print, and a bunch of the short stories and novellas are also available as standalone works.
Gotcha. Okay. So basically, what it comes down to is you. When I went to your author page this morning, it was just a bunch of stuff that was there, which is always good to see, which is just completely awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Chris Lester? What does Chris Lester do? Things like that.
I am a scientist by day, writer by night, podcaster on the weekends. I write urban fantasy mostly, with a eye towards social commentary through the lens of second world fantasy, using fictional worlds in order to comment on situations in our own world. I've done a little bit of horror, a little bit of superhero fiction, a little bit of sci-fi, but my bread and butter is my urban fantasy.
You're not a mad scientist, are you?
Not mad, just disappointed.
Just disappointed.
There you go, folks. A new genre of fiction.
The
Disappointed.
disappointed scientist. Yes. So what kind of scientist are you, perchance?
I do microbiological testing on drugs and drug product excipients, which means that we test the stuff that is going to go into your medicine to make sure that it doesn't have things growing in it that will kill you.
That's always a good thing.
It is a good thing.
So why haven't you written a story about that, or have you?
I haven't been doing it that long. I've been busy.
Okay, fair enough.
I've only been doing this kind of microbiology work since March of last year. Before that, I was doing clinical trials in Montana, and before that, I was a science teacher in California.
Do you like being a scientist better than teaching?
Yes, because there's just too many things that are institutionally wrong with the way education is done in the United States that breaks down the humanity of both teachers and students. And it was not something that I could deal with over the long run. I did 5 years, 6 years, 6 years in the trenches, and that was all I could handle. So I'm glad to be working with organisms that are a little easier to deal with than trauma-afflicted teenagers.
That's what he says until the zombie apocalypse starts.
What is he going to say after the zombie apocalypse starts?
Help me! Help me! Help me!
Oh God, this is just terrible. Well, glad to know that you're enjoying your new gig. I remember reading when you switched to that. I know you haven't been doing it very, very long, but you seem pretty excited about it. So I'm glad that's working
I was
out.
excited to have a job. I got laid off from my clinical research job in January of last year, and then was unemployed for 10 weeks while I was trying to find something else. And that was why we moved from Montana to Madison. And so I was thrilled to be working in the sciences, thrilled to be actually getting paid something closer to what I was worth for my education and experience background. Yeah, it's a good flexible job that gives me a lot of control over my own schedule, which is really nice as a writer.
Mm-hmm. It's kind
And
of nice.
Unlike teaching, it doesn't follow me home at night, so I actually have time to write.
Yay! Always good to have time to write.
Most definitely.
So how long have you been podcasting?
I started podcasting in September of 2007. That was when the first episode of the Metamor City podcast came out. I did Metamor City pretty much full time, with the consistent release schedule for 2 years, and then it was sort of off and on for another year and a half, and then I went away for a while from 2011 to May 2015, and then I came back with my new podcast, which is called The Raven and the Writing Desk. It is a stripped down weekly show as opposed to the full production, full voice acting, music and sound effects extravaganza that I had with the Metamore City podcast, which did not leave me time for a social life or relationships or anything else. So yeah, so it's been good. It's a lot more sustainable than what I was doing before.
J.R. Handley posted a question there that mirrors something that I was wondering. He says, Chris, how do you do the social commentary without losing audience and coming off as preachy? He knows that mess fiction is a big topic in genre fiction with loads of strong opinions on both sides of the issue. And I have to admit, I'm curious as well.
Well, first off, you have to be at peace with the fact that you are going to offend somebody at some point. You take a stance on any issue, you're going to turn somebody off and potentially turn them away. But that's the price that you pay for, saying something of substance. It's entirely possible to make a living doing fluff entertainment.
Here I am, right here.
But that's not terribly interesting to me. I prefer to, if I'm going to go through the time and effort to create a story, it's going to be dealing with things that are important to me. And that seems to happen regardless of whether I intend it to or not. When I started writing my first novel for Metamore City, Making the Cut, it was supposed to be this, just kind of, high adventure cyberpunk, story about these telepaths who are engaged in a shadow war with a vampire crime syndicate. And that's all in there. And there's a lot of action and things blowing up and setting on fire and all of that good stuff. But when I got into the process of writing it, I realized that what the story was actually about was it was essentially my love letter to the community that I had grown up in, the evangelical, conservative Christian community that I was no longer part of. And it was a story about somebody who's finding that they don't have a place in the world that they dedicated themselves to, and so they have to. They're now trying to figure out how to change the circumstances around their life so that they can make a new place for themselves. And the telepath society that appears in Making the Cut has a lot of the traits that that I found troubling about the society that I had grown up in. There's the sort of implicit sexism. There's the sense that anybody outside of the in-group is a threat. And the sense of being a community under siege that nobody understands. There's the sense of a impending apocalyptic confrontation with the evil people on the outside and with the people who are, on the outside who are not necessarily evil, but are confused and are misguided. And all these are all traits that are common to the community that I grew up in. And so I realized as I was writing it that Making the Cut was my way of dealing with these issues and processing them for myself. And so I think that the more of yourself that you put into your stories, the more of what matters to you that's in your stories, the more that you're going to run into topics and situations that are touchy that are confrontational, that require you to put forth a stance, and that's going to turn people off, but it's also going to resonate with people. There's going to be people who contact you and say, thank you for saying this. I've been wrestling with this thing for years, and you just put it into words for me, and you gave me a channel to process it for myself, so thank you. And so you win some and you lose some, you pick up some readers and you lose some readers. I think the biggest thing in terms of not coming across as preachy is to just make sure that it flows authentically from the characters and situations that you're writing about. And the message in my books is something that kind of grows organically from dealing with those characters in their lives. And it's not something like, I set out at the beginning to say, I'm going to tell a story about this political topic. No, it's that this political topic has been churning in my heart, in the back of my mind for the last however many months. And I've got these characters who I am interested in, and in the process of telling their story, it gets filtered through that. So it's more about being authentic to yourself and not shying away from things that you run into in the process of your writing, in order to tone them down or make them politically inoffensive.
I know
that
I'm
making any sense or not.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I know that just in writing futuristic space opera, as I do, merely mentioning and having a secondary character who was part of the LGBT community and had the right to marry the person of their choice sparked a backlash from a couple of people. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't expecting that from, just merely mentioning that the person was married. And
both Terry and I are apparently part of the gay cabal, pushing the gay agenda, making everybody gay. So.
That's what the person said, that I was pushing the gay agenda. So I already made the mind that one of the point of view characters in a novel that came along after that I haven't explored that aspect of it, is also part of the LGBT community. So that person is going to become very annoyed when that actually becomes part of the storyline.
I always liked Abigail Hilton's disclaimer at the beginning of her podcast. This book is intended for those who shop in the grown-up section of the bookstore. If you have to ask whether you will be offended, you probably will.
I should add that to my podcast. Really, really should.
You're kidding. Your disclaimer is already like 14 pages of F off.
No. You've never listened to my podcast. You have no idea what the hell you're talking about.
True. I want a happy ending.
Then go to a massage parlor.
Hey-o.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Metamor City is?
Okay, so Metamor City is, are you talking about the within the world, or the what the setting is overall?
I guess the world in general.
Okay, the world in general is a second world fantasy that started out as a spin-off of a shared fantasy world called Metamor Keep. It was started in 1998, I think, 1998. In a writer's community that I was part of. It was an open world, so it was public domain. Anybody can come in and write whatever they want to, but here's a universe referee, in essence, who is like setting the ground rules for what's canon and what's not.
So you had a curator, essentially.
Yeah, a curator, exactly. So we had, several dozen people who were writing in that setting, and I was one of the first. I was one of the people who came in and did a lot of the fleshing out of the world setting, establishing the religious environment, a lot of the geopolitics, things of that nature, building the world map. And I started having these ideas for, as we got closer to the turn of the millennium, I started thinking about, like, oh, what would this world of Metamor Keep look like in its year 2000? As they were approaching their equivalent of the 21st century. And so I started having all of these spin-off ideas and wrote some stories and put them out with the community, and had some people who were really enthusiastic about them and a whole lot of people who really did not like the direction that I was going. And so after a few of those stories were out, we were like, okay, easiest way to handle this is just, we're going to fork the code. I'm going to take, my storyline here, and it's going to become its own thing. It's going to that became Metamor City, and then the Metamor Keep folks who are not happy with what I was doing can go this other route, and they'll continue on with the direction that they want to go. And so that happened in like 2013, 2014, thereabouts. And but I still was looking for like a home. Not 2013, 2014. It was because it was 2007 when I started the podcast. I think that it was around 2010 when, after the Metamor City podcast had been running for a few years, that we officially finalized the divorce between the two settings. But that's where it got started, and so it's a might fantasy swords and sorcery world that grew up and became a futuristic world. They have the equivalent of 21st century technology, but they also have magic, which allows them to cheat. And so they have an effective tech level that is sort of Blade Runner-esque. So you have these very tall buildings and flying cars and flying motorcycles and virtual reality that actually works and cool stuff like that.
When you did this divorce, was there any kind of rights issues when you basically picked it up and took it with you?
So because it was a public domain universe at the beginning, it was pretty painless in that respect. None of the people involved were lawyers, and none of us were the actual inventor of the setting. Kevin Deanahan, who had been the one who created Metamor Keep, he left the setting and the writers community about 6 to 12 months into the existence of Metamor Keep, and he's like, I'm leaving, guys. Anybody can write anything they want to with this world. Have fun.
Wow.
So yeah, he was not interested in defending it as an IP, because he just created it because he wanted people to write stories. And so obviously when I'm dealing with characters who are were created by other people, then I'm reaching out to those other authors and saying, hey, this is what I excuse me, this is what I have in mind for this character in this setting. And so early on in the process of creating Metamor Keep, creating Metamor City, there were some discussions like with this other writer Rix, who created some of the characters who I'm using in The Lost and the Least, which is the new novel that I'm working on right now. But all that stuff was like ironed out years and years ago, before the podcast ever went live. So things are pretty pretty well settled at this point.
So do you still keep an eye on Metamore Keep? I mean, is this still going at this point?
It's still going. I don't have time to keep up with it anymore. One of the reasons why I went off and started doing my own thing is because there were some very prolific authors who were writing literally millions of words in this setting, that I could not possibly follow all of the twists and turns in their plot lines. And
oh boy.
So it was, what I did do is I created a wiki for Metamore Keep and got all that set up early on, and it has a forum built into it, which the Metamore Keep writers are still using to communicate with each other. And so that allows me to sort of keep tabs on how the setting is changing, because I can see the changes in the wiki. But since we forked the code, I'm not really involved anymore.
Is there anything you made in, or any decision you made in that you wish you had chosen to do something else other than what you did?
In terms of how we handled the separation, or?
Yeah.
It probably would have been less confusing and ambiguous early on if we had, talked to like a copyright lawyer to help us get, make sure that all the details were ironed out early on. But none of us we were all poor, amateurs writing on the internet, so nobody knew anything about anything, much less copyright law. It would have made things, easier if we'd had access to those kinds of resources. I wish that I could have maybe communicated my intentions a little clearer at the outset, so that there wouldn't have been some bad feelings. Because there were some folks who were kind of hurt when I first started doing Metamore City and it started taking off, because they're like, hey, there's all these people who are, listening to these stories who don't know about Metamore Keep. And so when I realized that was causing hurt feelings, I went back and made some additions to my website to honor Metamore Keep and to talk more about how the story world had gotten started. And then I added some stuff in the preface to Urban Legends, the first Metamore City story collection, that talked about how the story world had gotten started. And since then, that seems to have helped. But just if I'd approached the whole thing with a little more clarity of communication and a little more tact early on, it probably would have been a good thing to do.
At least as far as the creator's statement that he was leaving it for everyone to do as they wish, that certainly sounds like a release into the public domain to me. So that part is pretty clear that it's been released. But when you have multiple people writing in the same shared universe, you have to be careful not to use their creations as part of your IP, though.
Right, which is the it is always the tangled thing, because by the time that we went our separate ways, the stuff that I had added into the Metamore Keep setting was integral to those million-word plot lines that other people were writing. I had created the religion, the Lightbringer religion, that was the foundation of the religious conflict within the world. I'd created a lot of the political entities that other people were using, that they'd picked up and run with. And so, if I'd wanted to be a bastard about it and, jealously guard my IP that I'd introduced into the world, nobody would have been able to write anything. And, that's not a good way to handle things. not for anybody.
I'll just pick up my toys, take them away, and you can't play with them.
Exactly. It would be stupid. It would involve an army of lawyers, and they'd be the only people who made any money off of it.
Plus, the likely outcome is nobody can use anything ever again.
Exactly. Was the custody battle fierce in the divorce, says JR.
That sounds like it wasn't too
It looks like you got to keep the cat, so that
Right.
worked out well for you.
Yes. Is she behind me at the moment?
So, Paul, do you have one of the questions from our $10 patrons? Go ahead and ask.
Yeah, I got him. I'm working on it. Let's see. Subaman asks, what authors do you think have most influenced your writing and in what way?
Me?
Yes, sir.
Oh. So, preface this by saying that at Balticon this year, I'm going to be on a panel called Being a Fan of Problematic Things.
It sounds like an awesome panel.
Hold that in your mind when I tell you that the writings, the books that have probably influenced me the most as a writer are the Ender series by Orson Scott Card.
Okay.
I do not agree with Scott's politics at all, but he touched on something profoundly true in Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead and that whole series that has stuck with me more deeply than anything else I've ever read. And his approach to character in those books has definitely been a huge influence on me. He writes with a very close close third-person perspective that's very limited to the head of the character and delves a lot into what those characters are thinking and feeling. And that is something that has shown up a lot in my own work. Jim Butcher's Dresden Files has been a big influence on me in terms of the urban fantasy side of things and the wizarding side of things, and trying to incorporate magic into a world of technology. I haven't always made the same choices that he did, but he posed a lot of the questions that have, had me thinking about, how I would answer them differently or how I would answer them the same. And older than that is Poul Anderson's Operation Chaos, which was an alternate history fantasy that posited magic in our world. And so you had a magical version of World War II that took place. And then the story Operation Chaos took place in the years after that war. That was one of the best early urban fantasy novels that I have ever read, and it stuck with me a lot. Tolkien, of course, C.S. Lewis, the masters.
The masters. The usual who's who.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that Paul's that big of a fan of Tolkien.
Nope.
What about C.S. Lewis, though, Paul? I'm curious. I've never heard you express an opinion.
I read C.S. Lewis as a kid, and I liked. Oh boy, I guess
Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
That was actually my least favorite book of that series. That was actually my least favorite book. I think Voyage of the Dawn Treader was my favorite.
That was my favorite as well.
Gosh, I've read them all, but it's been so long in the past that I don't really remember the various plots between them. I like them as a whole. Right.
Yeah, I think Voyage of the Dawn Treader is the only one that really, really stuck with me. For some reason, Prince Caspian made sense to me. I don't know why. I do not know why.
And let's see. Other important influences. I wish I'd had more time to think about this ahead of time.
You have to ask these questions because, you know, I have to put you on the spot because you do that to people every week.
It's true. It's true. I do. I write lots of probing questions for people. I think probably a lot of it comes from old mythologies,
Hmm.
and from from Greek mythology, and from the stories of the Bible. Um, a lot of the issues that I'm sort of wrestling with are, things that you deal with, that mythologies also dealt with. Because mythologies are largely the attempts to try to make sense of the world and to make sense of the human predicament.
And many of them are parables.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes,
know my
indeed.
wife has begun watching American Gods,
Oh, yes.
and it's based off of Neil Gaiman's books. I have not read American Gods, so I don't really know anything except what I'm seeing on the television and the bits and pieces I'm going there. I'm curious whether or not that's something that may also be an influence for you.
Gaiman is a master. I adore Gaiman's stuff. American Gods was probably the least favorite of his books that I have read.
Really?
Wow. I mean, I like it, and I like what they're doing with the series a lot. But in terms of like the Gaiman stories that I truly deeply love, it's things like Coraline, Stardust, his short story, A Study in Emerald, which is his Cthulhu / Sherlock Holmes mashup. The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I love when Neil gets into fairy stories. Coraline is a fairy story, even though the word fairy never appears in it. The Ocean at the End of the Lane is a fairy story. And I was very much channeling Neil Gaiman when I wrote Whispers in the Wood, my novella that deals with fairy.
When you say fairy, you mean the Fae, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just making sure I was on the same page.
Yes.
Not Tinkerbell.
Neil is one of the best in the business at making the Fae fucking terrifying. Which is what they should be.
Butcher, I should say.
What's that?
I said he and Butcher.
I don't know that Butcher makes the Fae terrifying. They're potent, but I don't know that I would say anything in his books. He doesn't portray them in a way that makes them terrifying. Formidable, yes.
Right. That's the difference. Jim Butcher's, the Dresden Files, you're always in Harry's head, and Harry is a formidable, tough as nails, pugnacious son of a bitch who does not know when to quit. And so, yes, he runs into big scary monsters all the time, but he's a big scary monster himself, and that colors his approach to them. And yes, there are times when you have Mab or Maeve or whoever being alien and psycho, but he kind of approaches them the same way that he approaches human psychos like Nicodemus. There is not the sense that you get in like Coraline or in Ocean at the End of the Lane, where you've got a ordinary person who is in contact with this thing that is so otherworldly, and the edges of reality are bleeding around them, and they're just a normal person trying to get through this thing alive.
Okay.
Harry's not terrified, and so the reader isn't terrified along with him.
Right.
Interesting. What did you make of Neverwhere?
I like Neverwhere. I feel like it's a book I need to go back to. I listened to it in audio while I was in the midst of traveling, and so when I hear audiobooks for the first time while I'm in the midst of doing something else that is momentous and life altering, my experience of the book tends to get bled together with the experience of those events. And so I feel like I need to go back and experience Neverwhere again in a different context to sort of separate it away from that road trip where I was listening to it. What I do remember really sticking in my head about that book, apart from the everyman who's stuck in a world that makes no sense to him, which is something you see in a lot of Neil's work.
Yeah, Gaiman's, yeah, even Sandman, especially Sandman.
Oh yeah, Sandman. That's such a beautiful. I digress though. But the other thing that really sticks in my head about Neverwhere is the way that he handles angels.
Hmm.
Which is not all that different from the way that he handles the Fae, which makes sense. In both cases, you've got these otherworldly creatures that are following impulses and agendas that are so operating on such a completely different time scale from humanity that it makes them very hard um, to predict or understand, and that makes them scary. Um, but yeah, I really like what he did with the angel in Neverwhere.
Do you weave a lot of the uncanny into your work?
I try to. It depends upon the stories that what story I'm writing, and I find that the tone of my stories changes depending upon who my cast is for that particular story. Whenever Abby Preston is my viewpoint character, shit gets weird. And that's just part and parcel of the fact that she is a person who's halfway in and halfway out of the living world. And so she's, perceiving this world of the dead that is alongside the world of the living. And that alters her perception. And anytime that Abby walks on screen, it brings this automatic, creepy, otherworldly tone to the story, because she herself has this grasp on reality that is, if not tenuous, it is definitely different from other
Skewed.
people. Yeah, it's skewed. um when I'm writing with Will as my viewpoint character, my author character, then it tends to be more it tends to become kind of an Arthur Dentian farce, because he's an ordinary schlub in a world of things that are crazy going on around him. Um, so like the tone of what I end up writing changes very much depending upon my viewpoint characters.
Something you had mentioned earlier that I made a note but I forgot to ask. You said that when you were doing Metamor City that it was a second world fantasy. What exactly is a second world fantasy?
Second world fantasy is fantasy that takes place in a world that is not ours. Um, Urban fantasies are often first world fantasies. They take place in a world that is ostensibly our own, but just with magic hiding around the edges. Um, Jim Butcher's Dresden Files, the the world is still going on as it has always gone on. You've still got ordinary mortal events and politics happening, but you've got wizards and vampires and werewolves and stuff on the margins. um Second world fantasy takes place in a world that's completely different from ours, and there may be parallels to our world, but it's not the same countries, the same continents, the same nations. The genre that spans the two is portal fantasy, like Narnia, where you have characters that start out in our world, but then they travel to a second world, and then they come back. So Chronicles of Narnia is a portal fantasy.
Peter Pan's a portal fantasy.
Peter Pan is a portal fantasy, right?
That means almost every epic fantasy I know of is a second world fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Tolkien, you can argue, is a alternative history because he wrote his stories from the with the premise that they were taking place in Earth's distant past, and so the Middle Earth that he was writing in evolved into our world. But for all practical purposes, it's still a second world fantasy, just like a futuristic setting is a second world fantasy.
What about books? I'm thinking of one specifically, a series by Charles Stross, where I think that the series was called Merchant Princes, but some people had the ability to translate between one dimension, one reality, and another one that was nothing like our own. Maybe the same Earth, but different countries, different peoples, different abilities, different language, more like alternate histories where things changed. So is that sort of thing second world fantasy or portal fantasy? I guess it's portal
like it
fantasy.
could be a portal fantasy. I think it would probably depend on the extent to which how much the plot was dependent upon the fact that these were characters from one world who found themselves in another world that they didn't belong in. Portal fantasy is very much following on the old storytelling tradition of the person who steps into fairy, the person who steps into the land of the dead. It's about people from normal life passing through into a place that's different, and that experience changing them and them coming through out the other side. You think about the kids who go into Narnia in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and how that changes their lives when they return to Britain. The experience of having passed through the portal makes them a different person. Stardust, the experience of the young man, I think his name is Tristan, going into the world beyond the wall, changes who he is.
So it's a portal fantasy if they come back to our world. I know that in Strauss's world, that other world bleeds over into ours, like in the fact that they stole a nuke and then set it off in the White House. So it definitely has major impact in our normal Earth. So I like books that are a little messy like that you don't really know how to place them.
You know what's really interesting? Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials. It starts out, you think that it's a second world fantasy, but it becomes a portal fantasy when it gets into the subtle knife, because Lyra passes into our world, and she meets a character who's from our world. And then in the Amber Spyglass, you get a whole bunch of other different worlds that are involved. And so what starts out as a second world becomes a portal fantasy and going in the opposite direction, which I always thought was interesting.
Well, since you've got this humongous world you're dealing with, how on earth do you keep it organized?
I have a wiki. And I have a librarian. Mildred Cady is my super fan librarian who helps me maintain the wiki for Metamor City, And so together, we work together to put information into the wiki about the characters and places and stuff. I tend to put in stuff that's for new books as I'm writing, as I'm adding details, I'm putting in information in there. But she did a lot of the work of organizing stuff on the back end, sort of like going back through the established canon and putting things in from stories I had already released, and putting it into a format that made it usable. But that is, it's an indispensable tool for me. I could not keep all these details straight if I didn't have that wiki.
I sure as heck wish I had done something like that when I started, because my main series, I'm up to 7 completed books in there, and I've started noticing things from the early books that I inadvertently changed because I didn't have the details written down correctly.
Mm-hmm.
How many characters do you actually have so far, Chris? Do you have any idea?
Let me look. I can answer that for you. All right. In the wiki characters page,
$14,205.
You can't count that high.
He's over there writing a Perl script.
my rough account is that I've got somewhere around 100 to 150 characters.
Holy
that are
crap.
named in the wiki.
Wow. That's just terrifying.
You never have that problem, Paul, because you kill everyone.
Oh, shut
Right.
up. That's one of the joys of doing it the way I do it. Yeah, that person was around in this book, but they're not in this book. Why? Because they're dead.
You just have to hope they don't inadvertently come back to life sometime.
Nah, that doesn't happen. There's no resurrection in my worlds.
Not intentionally, anyway.
Not intentionally, yeah, that's true. Except for Thomas Reed, because I have to bring him back and kill him all over again.
He never comes back to life. Basically, you're just shipping his dead body from scene to scene.
No, he just
J.R.
gets killed
Handley
differently.
says, never even heard of Neil Gaiman.
JR,
Yes.
dude. Dude.
And he says,
Wow.
and wouldn't all characters change throughout the course of a novel? Yes, they do. What makes something a portal fantasy is that they are changing because they're passing from the world of the mundane into a world of the fantastic, where the rules are different.
Yeah, for instance, the kids in Peter Pan, when they get to the other side, I guess that is Narnia. Some of them could do magic, some of them could do this, but when they come back, they can't do it again.
But the experience has still
But
changed
the experience has still changed them. Right.
There's a show that I forget which channel it's on called The Magicians.
It's on Sci-Fi.
And it is an absolutely wonderful show. You get to watch the main character become part of a world that he never knew existed, and how it changes him, and how the world itself is just always so different than you expect.
I think that's one of the really fun devices you can always use. The reason why I ask you about the uncanny, Chris, because I know that's what makes this kind of fiction really, really work, is, making things seem unfamiliar even when they should be. And it's just a fun place to play.
Most definitely. And it's fun to it's very useful, I find, to make things unfamiliar in order to make it easier to talk about them. The book that I'm working on right now is called The Lost and the Least, and it is about a wizard detective who is investigating a series of deaths that are happening on street level. Society in Metamore is very socially stratified, both literally and figuratively. You have the rich people who live in the highest levels of the city, and the poor who live in the lowest levels, and then the middle classes that live in the middle. And so moving up in the world is a literal thing, but also very hard to do. But this is a story in which you've got people who are members of the underclass, the overlooked, the outcast, the forgotten, who are being taken off the street and murdered to power black magic.
Mm.
And this is obviously a fantasy story with, that depends upon things that are not, that don't have a direct real world equivalent. But by talking about this problem in this way, it allows me to deal with issues of class and issues of the marginalization of oppressed people,
Right.
which are very relevant, very contemporary topics. We look at the refugee crisis that's happening right now in our world. We look at the opioid crisis. There are things that are chewing people up and devouring them, that are being ignored or paid only lip service in our politics. And when you talk about these issues in our world, you're automatically engaging people's like tribal identities around their political, tribes, their political affiliations, and they stop listening.
Yep.
And that's true regardless of where you are on the political spectrum. You engage somebody's political identity, they stop thinking.
They start reacting.
They start reacting based on whether you seem like you're part of their tribe or not. By taking this and this idea and telling it in a completely different place with a different problem that is thematically similar but different enough that it doesn't feel like it's exactly the same thing, I think you can hopefully engage people in a way that's more authentic.
Well, that's what made the streets so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just basically, I could talk about gentrification, I could talk about homelessness, I could talk about all that stuff without really trying to make it into an axe grinding routine.
Right, exactly.
One of our patrons, Caleb James, asked this. He says, it's a question for all of us. If we knew for a fact that we'd never make another cent from our work, would we still write and put books out for others to read? Would we still have the passion to be writers if there were no monetary incentives for it? And we'll go ahead and start with you, Chris, and let you answer that.
I think it's probably impossible for me to not write. I've been telling stories since I was a little kid. I was telling stories on the internet for about as long as I've had access to the World Wide Web. So yeah, I think that regardless of whether or not this ever makes me more than beer and pizza money, I'm going to continue telling stories and finding ways to get them into people's hands. Fortunately, it's a lot easier now than it used to be.
I know for myself that if I didn't make any money at it, I'd definitely have to go get a day job. But I was writing when I had a day job, and I would undoubtedly continue doing so.
Yeah. I write. I'm glad that I have a day job, because it means that the pressure is not on my writing to be the thing that supports me. The writing is the thing that I do for myself. And yes, it does make me a little bit of money, and I would like for it to make me more money. I would like for it eventually to be part of my retirement plan. But but I'm glad that my personal livelihood is not currently leaning on the need for the writing to produce at that level.
It does put some pressure on you, I gotta say.
Nah, there's no pressure. I don't know what you're talking about. You're just a wuss.
You betcha.
I was writing before I made money. I was writing, been writing after I made money. But the biggest thing I needed to keep writing was to know that somebody was reading. That was the biggest reason that I came back to writing when I discovered podcasting and everything else, was the fact that it didn't seem like I was just shouting out into the wilderness. I could at least put the stuff up there in podcasts, and even if only 40 or 50 people were listening to it, that was enough.
Yeah, I mean, this is the reason why I came back to podcasting in 2015, because I realized I'd left podcasting ostensibly to focus on writing more,
Right.
and then I didn't write hardly anything for 2 years.
Oh man.
From when I finished Things Unseen in 2013, I wrote almost nothing up until PG Holyfield died.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And then it was like, oh shit, I don't know how much time I have left. Which is something that you know intellectually, but when you see a friend taken like that just so suddenly, when he had so many stories left to tell.
Yeah, it's that moment where you realize that clock is running and you never know when it's actually going to stop ticking.
Right. And for me, the podcasting gave me a way to connect with people, to know that there were people who wanted to hear my stories, so that I could inspire myself to keep telling them.
Yeah, I think that's why that's one of the reasons why I do this show. That's one of the reasons why I'm still writing and was dumb enough to quit the day job, not gonna, tell tech to go F itself and dive right into this, because, well, I was doing it anyway. It's been my passion, but I feel more alive because I have a community to be a part of, and that there are people who are interested in reading what I write. And it really does kind of change how you look at things a little bit. I mean, granted, I'm making barely enough money to warrant doing this, but the bottom line is that I'd still be doing it anyway. So hopefully things can just get better for all of us. We just kind of move up. Of course, Terry's Mr. Moneybags over there.
Yeah, whatever. I'm lucky that I'm making enough to keep the roof over my head. I just got to keep running faster. Got to keep writing more.
Writing faster. Do you want to be a full-time writer, Chris?
I have a dream that at some point I will be able to reduce the amount of time that I'm spending on the science, maybe go back, drop back to 4 days a week, and then have more time to write. Eventually I'm going to get to the point where I want to retire. And at that point, I don't think I'm ever going to actually stop writing. So my hope is that eventually I'll get to the point where I have enough of a continuous income stream from the long tail that I can afford to retire and just focus on writing. But until that time, I probably will always keep my hand in the sciences. It's nice to have a healthcare plan. It's nice to have a ready, steady revenue stream that you can plan on. It makes things a lot easier, particularly since my partner is an artist. She's a photographer, and so her income is like this. And so having at least one of us who's got a steady day job that provides benefits is really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, see, I'm in the position of your partner. My partner, on the other hand, has the job with the bennies, so
Right.
I can just sit around and slack, right, Terry? You can sit around and slack too, right?
Oh no, I can't sit around and slack. It's very hard for me as a professional writer getting to the mind space that when I release a book, that's not what I need to be focusing on, how well that book that I just released did. It's the day-to-day grind that produces something in 2 months that I won't get paid for 4 months that I need to be keeping in mind. And trying to make sure that I have that particular view is a challenge, and it's always been one. It looks like J.R. Handley asked 2 other questions that I'm going to meld into one question.
Bravo.
He said that he would love to have some general questions about your writing process so that we could learn and get better. And he also says, ask him about his writing process, please. He sees that you have 13 book titles, and he's curious at the speed that you write and any other processes you use to get things done. So those will all combine into a nice big old general question.
About my writing process. Okay. I am not a fast writer. I am not nearly as fast as I want to be. I have come to peace with the fact that I do not expect to become as fast as some of my friends are, but I want to do better than I do. I am using a shared Google spreadsheet called the Magic Spreadsheet in order to keep track of my writing, my daily word counts. It's a gamification thing.
Yep.
Which I find useful because I'm a rat with a lever, and so I need that little dopamine hit from getting those little points next to my name. That's helpful for me. I also keep my own spreadsheet where I keep track of both my writing and the work that I'm doing on other aspects of my studio work. So editing and layouts and advertising and all that stuff. There isn't a particular like time or place that I go to do my writing, because it has to fit in around my work schedule. One thing that I found has been useful recently is that I've been doing a lot of writing on my lunch break, where I will
remember those days.
Yeah. So I'll take my laptop with me to work, and I will set up a test to run, and then it's got an hour of runtime where I'm waiting for data, and then I'll go up to the break room and I will start working on the story. And I may not get very many words down. I may only get a few hundred words in that time. But what then happens is I'm thinking about that scene for the rest of the day and working through the problems with it in my mind. So when I get home, I will, and I can get back to the computer. It makes that time more productive. I find that I get more done in the evening writing sessions if I've had that even just a half an hour of writing time at midday. I can't really write in the mornings because I already have to get up and shower and pack my lunch and walk the dogs before I can go to work. So my mornings are pretty full already, and I'm not a morning person. So getting up much earlier than I already do would not be very helpful for my sanity. But midday works. Midday works pretty well. One of the biggest challenges that I've had is figuring out how to make sure that I have enough time with my partner in the evenings that that she doesn't feel neglected. There was a while last year where she was like, I feel like we're roommates and I occasionally see you, but you're always working on something. And so we had to make an agreement that, I would spend my Saturdays working on podcast stuff and writing stuff, and then Sundays were for us.
Yeah,
because
family
that's
day.
She gets off. And she's at work right now, so Saturday is the ideal time for me to actually get some shit done. And then I get, I spend time with her over dinner. We'll watch one television show, and then I'll go and do my writing stuff. But you carve out that time every day, and it helps. It helps a lot. Gotten a lot more stuff written in the last 2 years since I started doing things this way.
When I was working full time, I would write a little bit in the morning, sometimes a lot in the morning, and try and write at lunch or while I had tests running or something like that. And then if I could and wasn't completely brain dead by the evening, I could jump right back into what I was doing as if I'd never left it. Because it's just there. You don't have to start and stop. It's just there when you come back to it.
There's another thing I've been experimenting with in the last week or so, which is I will go on these long walks with the dogs at the dog park. We've got this beautiful park that's got these long trails where I can just get away from everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I will take my phone with me with my little Apple earphones and turn on the voice memo app, and I'll start talking to myself about what I want to do in the next scene that I'm going to write. And just kind of working out the problem. It's not like narrating the actual words that I'm going to put down, but it's okay.
It's creating the knots and then untying them.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how well that works. I've just started doing that. And we'll see how much it helps with making my actual writing time more productive.
Well, hopefully that'll work out.
Yes.
So how soon can we expect another book from you?
So The Lost and the Least is almost finished. It's been almost finished since December, but I haven't gotten a lot of time on it. So this week I am announcing on my podcast that for the 10th anniversary of Metamore City, I'm going back and I'm re-recording and re-releasing the stories from the Urban Legends story collection. This will, number one, let me get those re-recorded in a quality of audio that will let me then put it on Audible. And number two, while those are running on the feed, then I don't have to worry about running to write new fiction that can then go on to that week's episode. So I can focus on getting this damn novel out the door. My alpha reader has been like devouring what I've been sending her, and she's like really excited about where the story is going. But I need to get it finished so that I can then get it out to my round of beta readers and get my edits back and do all the other production stuff I've got to get done. But if all goes well, The Lost and the Least will be out by December. And that's when I'm hoping to have the Urban Legends audiobook done as well.
Cool. Well, when you get those done, we'll definitely have to have you back on the show.
Thank you. And very soon here, sometime in the next couple of weeks, the the audiobook for Divine Intervention is going to be available for sale on Audible. I've submitted the files. I believe I've got all the kinks worked out now. So that should be coming up for sale before the end of May.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad to see that you're getting back at it. I know you took a little siesta from things, a little what do you call it, sabbatical? There we go.
Mm-hmm.
So really good to see you come back. Can't wait to see the crazy you're going to do at Balticon this year. So
it's the story I have for Metamor City Live this year, Rafak Aleri and the Vampire's Bargain. It's gonna be a fun ride. You guys should definitely come out for it.
yeah, if you're going to Balticon, I try and as much as possible, as often as possible, attend that, but I frequently end up scheduled opposite you or something.
Yeah. Well, at least you know it's going to be on the show.
Yeah, exactly, which is always kind of nice.
Yeah.
All right, Terry, you got any other questions before we cut this sucker up?
No, I think we're good. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being our alpha tester. Our alpha interview. This was the first one. It went, like Terry said, it went a lot better than it should have.
Yay!
We're shocked. So, Chris, let's end with where can we find you?
You can find Metamor City at metamorcity.com. You can find my author blog and all the information about my audiobook production and narration services and the Raven and the Writing Desk podcast at chrislester.org. You can find the links there as well to my catalog of stories. I'm on Amazon right now. I'm on Amazon exclusively with the story collections, Urban Legends, Divine Intervention, Things Unseen, Making the Cut. Those 4 volumes are all on KDP Select right now. They will be for probably the next 6 months. So that's where to get me right now. You can get me on Amazon and Audible. And the podcast runs a new episode every week. So tune in there and you can see what I'm working on.
I also wanted to go ahead and thank the patrons for supporting us and making this podcast possible and making this live cast certainly possible. Thanks to our $10 contributors who all submitted questions, and we love being able to ask them for you.
Yeah, this was great. I'm really glad the attendance, and hope our patrons enjoyed this. And guess what? We'll be doing another one of these next month. So.
Woot.
Yeah, this is going to be, well, what do you think, Terry? We should do this every weekend, don't you think?
No.
Come on, I'm already juggling 3 or 4 shows.
It.
I'm already doing 3 or 4 shows a week. What's the 5th one?
Yes, but I have actual productivity that I need to meet.
Well, so do I. So do I. Do we really need to compare Audible sales? I'll leave it right there. Anyway, folks, thank you very much for joining us. Chris, pleasure talking to you. I can't wait to see you in 2 weeks at Balticon. It's going to be a blast. Hopefully we'll get some audio from you there as well. And patrons, you'll get more content Wednesday. So thanks for coming.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.